up, everybody? This is Coach Shane with SB Endurance, and today I'm going to talk to you about planning your race season for 2021 and some lessons that we learned in 2020 that I think are going to carry over into this year. So, to start by reflecting back on 2020 a little bit, I've never seen a year where more races have been canceled than in 2020, and we all know why. And for many of us, we had races that we had paid for, things we had planned, goals that we were training towards, that one right after another, they started getting canceled. Now, were all races canceled in 2020? No, they weren't all canceled. There were some, depending on where they were located and the size of the race and certain situations, that still happened. And for me, I ended up doing 2 races that I'll talk a little bit more about in 2020 that going into the season I had no intention of doing either one, and both of them ultimately allowed me to achieve 2 of the biggest goals that I had for myself in 2020. So what can we do? How can we learn from those lessons and move ourselves into 2021 so we can get the most out of this race season? So just to recap a little bit about what my 2020 season looked like, I had about 8 races scheduled for the year. My 2 A races were a marathon where I was trying to qualify for Boston. I was trying to run a 3-hour or sub 3-hour marathon at that race. And my other big one for the year was a 100-miler, and then had some different obstacle course races that I had planned on doing. Ultimately, all of those got canceled before I had the opportunity to partake in any of them. And I had my training plan laid out for the entire year. And in fact, both my big goals, both my Boston qualifying attempt and my 100-miler that I had on my schedule were both springtime races. And, excuse me. And my first one that got canceled was that marathon, and it got canceled about 2 weeks before it happened. So I'd put in all the work, I was in great shape, and it got canceled. And they rolled that over, that registration into 2021. And actually now that race has been canceled again in 2021. So, this kind of continues. My 100-miler, same thing. They weren't able to put on the race. They rolled everything forward. All my obstacle course races all got rolled forward. Ultimately, I ended up finding a marathon. I ended up doing the Sundance to Spearfish Marathon in South Dakota last year, where I did run a Boston qualifying time. I trained all over, started over from scratch, and because that was a fall race, and trained and ultimately ended up running a BQ. I ran a 2:54 at that race. Same thing with 100. I went and found another 100 because I was really dead set on getting a 100-miler in last year, and I ended up doing Mines of Spain and finished that race and had a great outcome. But that was an October race. So all my races that I had, all 8 of my races that I had originally planned on, that I had laid out on my calendar for the year, none of those ended up happening. And I had to go back to the drawing board and really decide, what do I think might happen for some of these races, and kind of revamp my training plan so that I could be prepared for them. The best I could do was to give myself 5 weeks in between those 2 efforts to accomplish both of them last season, just based on the way things laid out. So my BQ attempt was the 2nd week in September, and my 100-miler was the 2nd weekend in October. And so, like I said, I had about 5 weeks in between to go from marathon mode to 100-mile ultra mode, which was incredibly challenging, but I had a good plan going into it. I knew what I needed to do, and I executed it. So what can we learn from that? Number one, the thing that I learned from that is that the races last year that happened were small. They were small races. They still had a ton of safety precautions in place to be able to make them happen, but they weren't races with hundreds upon hundreds or thousands upon thousands of racers. One race had 60 people in it, and the other race had about 150 people in it. And that's what their states and municipalities and other entities like the Department of Natural Resources, all those things play a factor in whether or not they're going to decide to allow a race to happen. And I've already seen races this year get canceled. And it's not on behalf of the race directors. It is on behalf of some of those other entities that are saying, nope, we know you have all the safety plans in place, but because of the current situation, we're not going to allow you to continue, and they get canceled. So those smaller races are the ones that seem more likely to happen. So look for those and put those on your schedule. Make sure they're things that align with your goals, but go ahead and get signed up for them. The other thing to consider is what's a race's refund or deferral policy if they ultimately cancel the race. Some races are offering full refunds, some races are offering deferrals, some races are offering nothing. So make sure you weigh that in consideration when you sign up for the race going in. And don't be upset if they don't have a refund policy and the race gets canceled and you get nothing back. I warned you right now. Watch for that, because there are some instances where it does happen. Not all, but some. So I tend to avoid those types of races. If I sign up for a race, I'm going to look and see, is there insurance available, or do they have a deferral policy at the very least? And most of them now, to be able to get athletes out there, that's the case. They at least have a deferral policy in place. So those are some things you want to look for as you're planning your race season for 2021. The other thing I would really encourage you to do is plan your race season for 2021. Don't wait and see what's going to happen. Set some goals and go find some events that you think are likely to happen that align with your goals. Put those on your schedule. Maybe you're like me. Maybe you're signing up for races that were deferred from 2020. You don't really have an option, but you already paid for them, so you've got the entries there. So go ahead and put those on your calendar if they still line up with your goals. Or some of those, they might be offering deferral to 2022 already. You just kind of have to look at the details on those things. So put those things on your schedule, and then let's start building that schedule out as far as training goes. And you keep training for those events like they're going to happen until you know they're not going to happen. And that is the best thing you can do to stay on track. I know so many people that in 2020 planned events, and then when they saw stuff started getting canceled, they just got deflated. They lost their motivation. They stopped training, or they started training minimally, and they accomplished very little in 2020. For me personally, I went and I looked for what's my next best option, and I accomplished honestly two of the biggest bucket list goal items that I had for myself in my endurance career last year. I finished my first 100 miler and I ran my first BQ, and I did it because I refused to give up, and I refused to believe that there was something that was going to hold me back. And you know what, if you have goals like that, maybe a 100-mile race isn't allowed to happen, and maybe you can't find another one to sign up for. But you know what? If you're trained for 100 miles, go run 100 miles. Get a support crew. Get some friends. Set up some self-supported aid stations. Do whatever it is you have to do to accomplish that goal. And I know people who did that exact thing last year as well, and were very proud of their accomplishments. So keep that in mind too. You know, it may not qualify you for Boston. It may not get you UTMB points or get you into Western states, but it keeps you on track, it keeps you in shape, it keeps you in shape mentally, and helps you stay focused on the things that we enjoy doing. So keep those things in mind as you're starting to plan out races for 2021, if you haven't already done it. So I'm going to talk a little bit about my race schedule for 2021 and how I think about things when I'm looking at events, because I've got a bunch of them on my calendar already. So I've got them all written down here, and we'll go through some of these and talk a little bit about what's already transpired with my race season. So the first race that I've got on here is the River Gorge 21-mile trail race. It's a race in Tennessee that I'll be doing in March. That's on March 20th. It's got about 4,000 feet of gain in 21 miles, so it should be a good spring tune-up. The second race on my schedule here is 4-3, the Mount Charleston Marathon. That one is already actually canceled. They came out probably a month ago already and said the city of Las Vegas isn't going to allow us to have this event, and we're canceling it now. We're going to give you credit for a future marathon that you could sign up for. So that one's already off my schedule. And that was a big spring race for me again. That was one that got canceled last year that I rolled over this year. Canceled again. And we'll talk about how we refocus on that a little bit. Third race, Ice Age Trail 50 mile. Then we've got Kettle 100 in June. And then moving into July, Tough Mudder, Minnesota. August, Toughest Chicago, which I've got some specific goals for. In September, OCR World Championships in Vermont, which again was canceled last year and I've rolled over to this year. And then they did announce Boston, which is going to be in October if they allow us to register. So they picked a date in October. They said it'll be October 12th, and that's if we're allowed to do it given the situation. That's up to the city and the state and the race directors, and they haven't opened registration for that one yet. But at least we have a tentative date of when it could happen. We know it's not going to be spring. Unfortunately, it was supposed to be on my birthday this year, which I was really excited to be able to qualify because I was going to do the 125th Boston on my birthday, but that just didn't happen. So now it's a maybe for October. So again, this race is off the schedule, so I'm just going to erase that. And we're going to talk about how I look at my race season. And one thing you want to consider is that not every race can necessarily be your best performance. You have really good performances, but if you really want to get the most out of things, you can't say that every race I'm going to go into, especially if you're racing this many times in the course of 7 months, and maybe more. There might be more races that sneak in there. You can't say that I'm going to be in peak condition for every one. It's just not possible. There's a small percentage of athletes that ever even come close to that. And if you really look at top tier athletes, that's exactly what they're doing too. They're not saying that every race is going to be the best. They're picking out the ones that are the most important for their career and for their goals, and they're saying those are the ones that I'm going to be peaked for. So we want to think about that with our own race schedules as well. So I kind of list races as A, B, or C in terms of what's the priority. So my marathon, my spring marathon, was actually going to be an A race. That's off the board now. I was going to try and run another BQ just so I had a backup time for future years. That one's not happening now. Maybe I end up running a BQ again at Boston if Boston happens, or maybe I try and BQ again in 2022. But we know it's not going to happen this spring. So there's an A race right away that I was already tuning up for that isn't going to happen. And actually this River Gorge Trail race, I registered for that race after I found out that my marathon was canceled. No, so why isn't that my A race? Why is that a B race? Well, really, it's kind of an afterthought race. It's more of a fun run. I want to be in shape for it, but I'm not going to go out there and try and crush it so hard that I'm going to have to take a long time to recover afterwards, because really my next big A race on the schedule is Kettle 100. I want to have a good performance at Kettle 100. It's right in our backyard. I train there all the time. I want to show up and really perform that day. So River Gorge is a B, kind of get the early season jitters out a little bit, race a little bit, but not really go out full steam at that one. Ice Age 50, another race that I really enjoy doing. However, I'm putting that one down as a C race in terms of priority. Do I have every intention of going out there, running it, finishing it, whatever? Definitely. But that is a training race for me. That is not a race. I'm going to go out there and go easy all day long. If I finish in under 10 hours, it better be 9:59. I don't really want to run any faster than that. It's got a 12-hour time limit. I have no worries about finishing in the 12-hour time limit, but I don't want to do it fast. I want to recover well so that I can then perform well at Kettle about a month later, a little over 5 weeks later. And so I don't want to have to take a whole lot of time to recover from that 50. I really want that to be kind of my last big volume week, or kind of that into the next week, but that'll probably be my longest run leading up to Kettle 100, and I want to recover well and just train right through it. So that's why it's a C race. It is not a high priority performance. Kettle 100, again, is going to be an A performance. That's going to be my big performance in the spring/summer. Um, and then starting into July, I'm beginning kind of the second half of my season is more obstacle course racing than it is trail or road running. So Tough Mudder, Minnesota, that's just a 10-mile course. It is a race. I always do the Tougher Wave, which is a timed race. But for me, that's a C race. 10 miles, even if I go really hard for 10 miles, it's not going to take long to recover from. And I'll be right back to training then as normal the next week. Not a huge priority. I'm not going to go out there and break myself or do anything stupid to try and perform well. Again, really kind of low priority. Toughest Chicago. So that's a very flat course, and I've raced it a number of times. It's a 12-hour overnight race in this case. For me, that's going to be a B race. I've got some mileage goals that I want to hit for that race, but I'm not going for a podium slot. I'm not going to, again, go out and set myself back in terms of training. I think in 12 hours, I would like to hit 50 miles, and I'm going to kind of shoot for that. But if I don't think it's going to happen, I'm not going to sacrifice the remainder of my season to try and make that happen. The reason I would like 50 miles, though, is so that I can break into the pro class at this year's OCR World Championships in Vermont, which is in the end of September. And OCR World Championships for me this year, I'm putting down as an A race. The courses are shorter. The long course there is going to be 15K. I generally race 2 or 3 times at that championship. I'll do the short course, the long course, probably the team race as well. But not huge volume, but higher intensity. So I want to be pretty peaked for that. I don't want to. I want to be real sharp. I don't want to come in tired in that race. And then Boston. Boston is more of an experience race for me. The hard work was getting into Boston. If I don't run another BQ time at Boston, I am not going to be heartbroken. And in fact, I'll probably enjoy the race a whole lot more if I don't even make that a goal. And that's why I'm putting Boston down as a B race for myself. So having those things allows me to really well structure my program. And honestly, I've been training all winter long. For those of you that follow me on Strava, you've seen the mileage I've been putting in, and then moving into spring, I'll be adding some more volume, sharpening things up a little bit, and getting ready to race. And this is exactly what you want to think about when you're planning out your race season, and plan it like it's going to happen, train for it like it's going to happen, and set your goals for each race. But keep in mind that unless I'm only racing 2 or 3 times over an extended period of time, not every race is going to be my top performance. And the more frequently you race, the more that is true. If you're racing twice a month, all summer long, pick out the races that are really important to you and define what is that goal. Is it a podium spot at all costs? Is it a certain time? Is it a PR? What is it? And build your program to reflect that. Everything else should, in some regard, be a training race, not a top performance race. Pick out those couple top performances you want to have this year and really make it a priority to make those happen. We don't know how 2021 is going to go. We could be sitting here in December of this year and none of us have done any races. I hope that doesn't happen, but we don't know. And the people that got the most out of 2020 are the people who approached it in this manner. I know a lot of good athletes who didn't approach it in that manner and kind of had deflated seasons. So keep that in mind. And, if you guys are interested in setting up a consult with me, I do this kind of thing, these race consults where we plan out your season at no cost. And say, let's talk about your goals and your priorities and give you some guidance on how to set that up. So if you're interested, shoot me a message, shoot me an email, put a comment below, and I'll get in touch with you, whatever it might be. But I want to see everybody really have a great season, and let's get the most out of this year. So hopefully you guys found this video helpful and you have a little idea of kind of how I think about these things. If you're not following me, go ahead and follow or click subscribe. I really appreciate it. That's all I've got for you guys today. I hope you have a good one, and we'll talk to you soon.